A man discovers he's the biological father of 533 children through anonymous donations to a fertility clinic 2 decades ago. Welcome back to Movies Explained. Today's film is a comedy drama from 2013 titled Delivery Man. The movie begins with a guy named David who is working at his family's butcher shop. One morning, as he's about to start work, his brother Alexei, who is on the phone with his very pregnant wife, advises David not to have kids. In response, David confesses that he's growing weed in his room to repay an $80,000 loan. Alexei becomes frustrated with David for not having his life together. David tries to get another loan from different banks to pay back his overdue one, but they all say no. Throughout the day, he also runs errands like buying team jerseys for his dad, who is also his boss, and getting gardening books. Meanwhile, he keeps getting parking tickets for using the butcher shop truck, which he's not supposed to drive for personal reasons. Eventually, the truck gets towed at night, disappointing his father once more. David meets up with his girlfriend, Emma, and apologizes for not being around lately. When Emma reveals that she's pregnant, David wants to be involved in the child's life. However, Emma thinks David is too unreliable, similar to Alexei, and dismisses him. She's upset with David for not being more proactive in his life and letting it pass without direction. Later that night, David goes to his friend Brett's house to discuss Emma's news. Brett, who is a divorced father, bluntly tells David that he's not prepared for the challenges of parenting. It seems like everyone around David is urging him to grow up and do something meaningful with his life. Meanwhile, Brett's 3 kids keep interrupting their conversation, almost as if they're supporting Brett's argument. When David returns home, he finds a man named Mark Williams sitting in his kitchen. David assumes Mark is there to ask for money and tries to pretend he only speaks Spanish, but Mark sees through it. Mark explains that he's a lawyer from the Kabrowski-Levitt Clinic. 20 years ago, David used to anonymously donate sperm under the alias Starbuck. It turns out David's donations helped conceive over 500 children, and now 142 of them want to know his identity. The clinic is legally bound to keep David's identity confidential, but the children are taking legal action to obtain information about their biological father, David. The next day, David meets Brett at a coffee shop. Brett, who used to be a lawyer, examines the details and documents of their situation, and he plans to reactivate his license to help. While Brett is enthusiastic about it, David is less excited. He just knows he needs a lawyer, and Brett's help is all he can afford right now. Mark has given David a folder prepared by all 142 of his children, containing profiles of each child, their identities, locations, and occupations. Brett advises against opening it, but David can't resist. He randomly selects a page and reads it, only to be shocked by what he sees. He immediately calls Brett to share the news. Still using the butcher shop's meat delivery truck, Brett and David set out to meet Andrew Johansson, the person from the file. They arrive at a basketball stadium, where they discover that Andrew is a very famous professional basketball player. David enthusiastically cheers for Andrew, amazed that someone so accomplished shares his genes. Meanwhile, Brett discusses potential defenses for David's case, like pleading insanity. But David refuses, saying he doesn't have mental problems. Later, David meets Emma at her job as a police officer. He expresses his commitment to turning his life around, and then awkwardly bikes away. Emma, annoyed by the interruption during work, seems skeptical of his words. Back at the butcher shop, Alexei complains about his lack of sleep due to his newborn baby, but also expresses his love for the baby. David surprises Alexei and their father by announcing that his girlfriend is pregnant. They congratulated him, even though they didn't know he had a girlfriend. Later that night, David can't resist looking at another page from the folder of his children. This time, he discovers a barista named Josh. He decides to visit Josh at his workplace, but their interaction doesn't go well. Josh is upset because he's missing a big acting audition, and David unintentionally lectures him in a fatherly way, which annoys Josh. David offers to watch over the coffee shop so that Josh can attend his audition. Josh is surprised by the offer from a stranger, but accepts it. However, David ends up making bad coffee for the customers, and receives a scolding from his dad over the phone. When the owner of the coffee shop arrives and learns about the situation, he decides to fire Josh. It turns out that Josh is actually a terrible actor who never lands any roles. David realizes his mistake, but when Josh returns, he reveals that he got the part despite losing his job. David is thrilled that he was able to help Josh. Back at his apartment, David reads another profile and ends up at the apartment of a young woman while pretending to be a pizza delivery man. She's upset and crying on the phone about money owed to her. Awkwardly, David explains that the pizza is free, but the girl just wants him to leave. When he looks into her bedroom, he realizes she's unconscious from drugs and rushes her to the hospital. The girl, named Kristen, receives treatment but can't leave without a parent's signature. Kristen claims David is her father, though she's not entirely sure. She wants him to sign the release papers so she can leave. The doctors suggest rehab for Kristen, but David decides to trust her and signs the papers, allowing her to leave. He worries if it's the right choice and stays up all night. In the morning, he waits outside her job to make sure she arrives safely. Seeing her go in, he feels relieved, realizing he made the right call by trusting his instincts and his kid, rather than other adults in their lives. David decides to get rid of all the weed he's been growing in his apartment. Instead, he puts up all the profiles of his biological children on his wall. He commits to meet each of them and offers help whenever he can. Without revealing his identity, he tries to be a positive influence in their lives, like a guardian angel. For example, one of his biological children is a street performer. David attends all of his performances and encourages others to tip the performer. Another child is a swimming coach, so David attends swimming lessons and pretends to drown, giving the young man an opportunity to rescue him. David continues to meet and get to know all 142 of the profiles he received. Even though he becomes close to his children, they are unaware of his true identity, and David intends to keep it that way. He confides in Brett about his activities as a guardian angel for his biological children. Despite Brett's warning to stop, David seems determined to continue helping them for the foreseeable future. After their conversation, David finds Emma waiting in his truck's passenger seat. She tells him she's going for her first ultrasound and invites him along, but emphasizes that it's just as friends for now because she still doubts his commitment. The ultrasound goes well, but Emma remains unsure about David's role in her and her child's life. They sit and talk at a playground, where Emma nervously watches the kids play, fearing she might not be a good mother or might not love her child. Emma doesn't know about David's many children, and she's surprised when he delivers an inspiring speech about the joys of parenthood. Pleased with David's words, Emma humorously labels him a father on probation. David then visits another of his children, Ryan, who lives with cerebral palsy in a disabled home. Although Ryan cannot speak due to his disability, David spends the day assisting him. When the nurses inquire about David's relationship with Ryan, he doesn't reveal the truth, only implying that he's a friend. David decides to meet another one of his sons. While observing him, David notices that the young man has multiple partners who seem unaware of each other. Intrigued, David follows the young man to a meeting. However, it's only when he sits down that David realizes the meeting is actually of all the Starbuck kids gathering to uncover the identity of their missing father. David attempts to leave the meeting since many of the kids recognize him, but the panelists assume he wants to ask a question. He awkwardly suggests that it's not important to know who Starbuck is and encourages the kids to appreciate their siblings. This earns him applause as he exits. Outside, Kristen spots him and they share a hug. David fabricates a story claiming he is the adoptive father of Ryan and attended the meeting on his behalf due to Ryan's disability. He rushes out and finds Brett, who was there for case reconnaissance. Brett advises David to stop meeting the kids, warning him that such actions could jeopardize their lawsuit, but David seems reluctant to heed the advice. On his way home, David is confronted by the loan sharks he owes money to. They rough him up by repeatedly dunking him in his bathtub and then leave. David tries to borrow money from his friends and family, but is turned down every time. As he tries to cope with the situation, David finds a young man named Vigo in his living room. Vigo, one of David's biological sons, had seen him at the meeting and figured out he was their father. Vigo asks to stay for a few days, and David feels compelled to agree because Vigo could reveal his identity to the other kids if he doesn't comply. David takes Vigo to one of his family basketball games, where Vigo's skills are not great, but he still has fun. After the game, they share some ice cream, and David accidentally suggests that Vigo and the other kids aren't his real family, which hurts Vigo's feelings. To make amends, David attends the next Starbuck Kids meeting, which takes place at a campground by the lake. They spend the day doing enjoyable group activities and bonding with all the kids, with everyone assuming that David is Ryan's adoptive father. As the sun sets, David introduces Ryan to everyone, wheeling him around to meet them. After returning to the disabled home, David quietly tells Ryan that he is his biological father and promises to always be there for him. Later, Emma is invited to meet David's father and siblings for dinner, and they all have a pleasant time together. It's revealed that the money David earned from sperm donation was used to take his family on a trip to Venice after his mother fell ill. As the weekend ends, David visits Brett and learns that the Starbuck Kids reunion has made headlines, appearing on the front page of the newspaper and covered by multiple news outlets. This publicity means millions of people now know about the lawsuit. Brett suggests that this publicity could benefit their case if they countersue the clinic, potentially earning enough money to cover David's loans. However, David rejects the idea. As more people learn about the story, tension escalates. While shopping for baby strollers, David asks Emma what she thinks of Starbuck, not realizing she's criticizing him without knowing his identity. She expresses her disapproval, unaware that Starbuck is actually David. Meanwhile, loan sharks threaten David's family, even endangering his father by nearly drowning him. Urged by his brother, David feels compelled to repay the loan sharks at any cost. With few options left, David goes to Brett's place and agrees to pursue the countersuit. Brett rehearses his speech while David takes down the profiles of his kids from the wall. Brett's children mock his weak argument and are promptly sent to bed. The first court hearing receives international attention, and David struggles with his arguments under the mounting pressure. The opposing lawyers claim that keeping Starbuck's identity hidden has harmed the children and will keep doing so, a point the judge seems to support. David counters by stating that without the anonymity clause, none of the children would have been born in the first place. The court decides to consider the matter further. The two of them converse in the rain outside as they await the verdict. Brett admits he feels inadequate as a lawyer and suggests David might have been better off with a more competent attorney. At court, the judge announces the final verdict. Starbuck is granted complete anonymity, along with $200,000 in punitive damages. The press interviews Brett after his win, and he inadvertently thanks David on live television. When asked about David's identity, Brett panics and fabricates a story, claiming David is his secret lover. The press accepts the explanation and moves on, unaware of the truth. The Starbuck kids feel let down, but still hold on to hope that Starbuck might reveal himself, even though he's not legally obliged to do so. Later, at their favorite diner, Brett and David don't celebrate their victory. Instead, they appear disheartened. Brett explains to David that if he reveals himself, he'll lose all the money they won in the countersuit. David wrestles with the dilemma of wanting to do the right thing, but finds it much more challenging than he anticipated. David decides to confide in his father about being Starbuck. His father reacts with amusement rather than anger and shares a poignant story from his own life. David's father recounts how he grew up in poverty and how David's paternal grandfather once loaned him $10, which was all he had to start a business. His father promised to repay the loan once he succeeded, but unfortunately, he passed away before getting the chance, leaving the family in financial struggles. As David's father reflects on his own experiences, he wonders what was more difficult for his own father. Was it not being repaid the money, or not being able to be with his family in his final moments? At that moment, David's father hands him a stack of dollars, representing his inheritance and share of the meat shop. With his father's blessing, David goes home and shares his identity as Starbuck on Facebook, which quickly spreads. He then rushes to Emma's house to share the news with her, only to find an ambulance outside. It turns out Emma's son was born prematurely, but is otherwise healthy and well. David wakes up at the hospital and is visited by not only his brothers and father, but also all of his biological children. He shares the news about their new little brother, and they express a desire to see him. However, David hasn't told Emma yet that he's Starbuck. David proposes to Emma, and after she agrees, he reveals his identity as Starbuck. Emma panics initially, but David reassures her that it's a positive development, as they'll have plenty of free babysitting. After some convincing, Emma eventually accepts the news. The movie ends with all the children gathering to meet Emma's newborn baby, bringing everyone closer and uniting them as a family. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos.